everyone. Welcome back for another episode. Today we are going to talk about something that I know grad students are very used to, but probably everybody else has experienced this at some point in their life, and that's burnout. Pretty excited to talk about this. I'm someone who transitioned from a career and now, getting a doctoral degree, so burnout is a very familiar feeling. I know Kibby has lots to talk about personally when it comes to burnout. And burnout's been higher during COVID as well. Not getting the socialization that we're used to, not getting the fresh air we're used to, staring at a screen for hours and hours and hours on end are all, kind of obviously going to take us into the land of burnout. All right, so Kibby, tell us what burnout is.
Yeah, we kind of go with one model of burnout. I mean, burnout right now is actually becoming more and more popular in research, and especially psychology research. So I think it's like a little bit more of a new area of study. So, it's kind of an exciting new field. Well, not exciting. It's kind of sad that this is growing so much that we need more research on it. But hey, one model that we go with is Maslach's model of burnout. And that model characterizes burnout with emotional exhaustion. So feeling super, super tired, feeling like you don't have energy to go to your job or responsibilities, kind of feeling low and down or a lot of negative emotions, right? About your job specifically. And it could kind of broaden out to other areas of your life. Another part of that model is cynicism. So just feeling really cynical about your job. Maybe before you used to have a great sense of purpose and excitement and sense of meaning with your job, and now you kind of feel like, okay, this is not actually that meaningful. I'm not really doing anything. What's the point? So a lot of those thoughts. Depersonalization is another part of that model. So just kind of feeling like I'm not human anymore, right? I'm just a worker. I'm just used this way. I'm just an employee. I don't really mean anything. No one really notices me. I might go into work with this kind of feeling of going through the motions, right? So depersonalization and reduced professional efficacy is the last part. So that's basically lack of belief in yourself, right? Lack of belief in your capabilities, feeling like you can do this job, feeling like you matter or your skills are valuable. Is kind of Jacqueline's nodding really knowingly, and tell me a little bit about your reaction to this, Jacqueline.
First of all, that does not describe my experience now, so that's a relief. But I mean, I hadn't really conceptualized my UX career as a case of burnout. I thought of it more as just hating the work and getting depressed and feeling useless and worthless while I was there. But turns out a lot of the components of this model you're talking about are exactly what I went through. I mean, I remember having like the excitement about the tech industry when I started, and then at a certain point I'm just like, I remember writing a short story that everybody I showed it to hated because it was so cynical. It was so just like, it was almost boring because this person is just complaining the entire time about like the futility of everything and about how he feels at work. And that's where I was. I was just like, I mean, I remember thinking like, there's no possible way I can keep living in these circumstances. Like, I cannot keep doing this work. I mean, I became really set against it and got out pretty quickly. So that's, I guess my case was one for quitting because there was no passion in it for me at all. But we do want to talk about how that is not the only solution here. But also just feeling like I had nothing to give. I was a nuisance to everyone around me. I couldn't, like, nothing I made mattered, but also I couldn't even make meaningless things well. I was just like a bad worker. And then, I remember coming home every day feeling like my brain was like squished at the front of my skull from staring at this computer all day, bored out of my mind, and I would like have to have a gin and tonic in order to unsqueeze it. So it was like already kind of starting unhealthy habits there. Fun times with burnout.
Yeah. Well, you're bringing up an interesting point because, I mean, I know that you talk about your experiences with UX as like, this is a job that I did, it really wasn't a good fit for me, and now that kind of led me to psychology. And so, I don't know if it's not that, but similar feelings could come when you are you're just not in a job that makes sense for you, that it was meaningful to begin with, right? Like that was just existential crisis, probably a clarifying moment of like, I shouldn't do this, I should do something else. It's not good for my mental health. So you can feel burnout, and burnout can actually turn, as you said, into like making you reevaluate your choices, reevaluate your life, reevaluate how this environment or work environment is impacting you, right? So there's a lot of good that can come out of that burnout. And also it does kind of it could feel a lot like depression, right? I think that's what they're trying in the research, trying to really distinguish burnout from depression, because they do overlap and the feelings can be similar, but it's just a very specific trigger for the depression and a very specific kind of manifestation of, I can't possibly do this job, it's meaningless, right? It's kind of like really applied to the job itself, which can, kind of branch out into like global, you could be depressed, right, in that job. And I know that you were saying that you're pretty bummed out at that job. So
I was pretty bummed out. Burnout is actually a diagnosis in Sweden.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah, I think some other countries as well, but I know Sweden for sure has an actual diagnosis for burnout. But yeah, it does bear striking similarity to depression. The difference, I guess, is that if you were to go on vacation when you're burnt out, you would likely enjoy that vacation. Mm-hmm. It would feel like such a relief, versus when you're depressed, you might not actually feel any better because you're sitting on the beach still. It's just more global.
Yeah, and I would even say that burnout could, if you're finding yourself so burnt out that even on that vacation you can't feel that as restored as you used to, that's probably the burnout transitioning to more depression. I'm guessing. I don't know the research on this, but what we understand, there's of course a couple of different potential explanations for burnout, but one that I really like is the job demands resources model. And it's because it's super simple. It basically says that burnout happens when you are in a job where the demands of the job is higher or larger than those resources you have to support that job, those responsibilities in that job, right? Super simple. The demands are higher than what you have to help you with it. So I know that burnout, a lot of people are feeling burnt out now because like so many demands on our time, like with the Zoom life, and people are at home, they have kids, they don't have as much care or support as they used to. So the demands stayed the same or got more because Zoom life could kind of feel more intense, and then but fewer resources. So I kind of like just knowing that if you're feeling burnt out, like you could ask yourself, are the demands of my job higher than what I have to help me with it?
Yeah, so apparently there are pretty predictable causes of burnout, and it's good to get clear on what the cause is, because then you can actually target it and change it. Because the burnout is going to tell you, quit, like get out, stop doing this work. But it's possible to make your situation better when you're actually at the job by figuring out what the problem is and then seeing if there's any kind of solution. So, one of this is very obvious, is workload. Like you just have more work to do than you have time for. This is along the lines of what you were talking about. Like you just don't have the resources to complete everything that the job is demanding and that you do. The second is like if you feel like you don't really have any choice about your work life or duties, so you just don't have any agency over like even. My best friend was just very burned out in his job because it just dogged him. Like it was hard for him to make plans even outside work because he was working in social media, and so there was just always something to post. And people always needed him to like work on the weekends or in the evenings, and like things were just given to him and it was expected to get done. So it was just like took away even his agency about his non-work life. But also just like if you're not able to have any input in your projects or on what projects you do, or your tasks or responsibilities, that sucks. Another is if you feel like you're being exploited, you're not really getting any reward out of it, you're not getting any positive feedback. That is how I felt. Another is if your work environment just sucks, like you don't like your boss, your people or your coworkers are gossipy, catty, mean. There's just something wrong with the work environment. Along with that, there's just like no there's no community like with your coworkers. This is something that I've seen with patients, especially in COVID, is like some people now, like, they just don't have any contact with coworkers. If they've started a job during COVID, they may not have met a single person other than like their supervisor, and maybe like one other person on their team. And so that's a total lack of community. And then finally, if you're in a job that's totally against your values, I remember when I was working in UX, like they wanted us to create an app that was supposed to help opioid addiction, but like they wanted it to be as cheap and simple as possible. It didn't really seem like they cared that much about scientific evidence, for what works. It was just like a money-making kind of advertisement for an opioid company. So I just was like, what am I even doing?
Yeah, I mean, all of it, what you're saying is in line with that job demands resources model of, too much work, not enough support, right? It's just a simple balance. And it really, I like that you highlight the different parts of what could be the work or the support. The community feeling is something that I think we really underestimated, or at least a lot of people probably took it for granted. I have been really burnt out in different parts of this year, because, we're doing a lot of therapy over Zoom or anything like that, and by myself in my apartment. I took for granted how important it was to have, to be in a clinic and have other colleagues being down the hallway that, in between sessions, going to say hi to someone, or, having a snack, or just having that sense of support of community and camaraderie. Now that we don't have that, the workload felt like a lot more and the support felt like a lot less. So yeah, little things like that.
I like to think of it like when I was growing up, I hated going to school unless I had a crush on a boy. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to school to, like, my crush is going to be there. And it's not quite like that anymore, but it just goes to show how important the people are there. And I mean, even like, now when I have a job, it's not just I'm going to class or I'm going to, Mount Sinai to grind out 8 hours. It's like, no, I'm going to see my work wife, and like we've got our dynamic, and we have tradition. We got a pet fish and did like office planks, and just stuff that made it feel like so much more than a job. And when that's lacking, it's just 8 hours of slog. Yeah.
I mean, even without the pandemic, my biggest moment of burnout was during grad school, and this is. Mm-hmm. For people out there in grad school, power to you. I feel like, especially in PhD or long programs, there is usually, it's kind of the norm that some part of the journey, you're going to doubt yourself and everything, and think about dropping out, and have like all the symptoms of burnout I just listed, the emotional exhaustion, cynicism, depersonalization, and reduced professional efficacy. Totally normal. So burnout is like rite of passage, maybe, in especially PhDs. But I remember my fourth year, and this is something that I, of course, clinical psychology and the PhD program, like I feel very strongly about what I do. I love it. It's in line with my values. I really like my program. And still, I felt the burnout. I felt like there were so many tasks and responsibilities, and I just didn't feel like I felt like I was treading water. I felt like I was desperately trying to keep up, and I had a couple of really difficult interactions with the supervisor that really made me question myself and my abilities. So the reduced support there, but things kept coming. It just felt like, it felt kind of like being in a wind tunnel, right? Like you're just sitting there and just like all the to-do lists and the things and the meetings and everything kept blowing by me, and maybe that's the depersonalization that I felt. Like I just kind of felt like I was just going through that wind tunnel and just trying to stay alive, right? Just trying to keep up, but not. Mm-hmm. And I remember just feeling like every meeting or every session felt like I had to get more and more energy to get myself there, right? Like normally when I'm, I walk in, I'm excited and I sit down and do my thing. But this felt like, like it was like pulling teeth to, okay, I'm going to have a meeting in 10 minutes. All right, like get some more coffee. Come on. I had to like psych myself up a lot more. And sometimes like feeling like my heart wasn't in it, which feels really being burnt out as a therapist is super sad for me, because so much of the work is like putting my heart there with that person, and feeling like my mind was checked out, or I felt less of myself, or questioning myself felt horrible. And I felt guilty on top of that because I was like, oh, I wasn't the best therapist for that. And then I even thought about dropping out. Like with all this for months, feeling this way, I thought to myself, like, maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe this is not what I'm good at. Maybe this is not who I am. And that was the scariest part, because that is part of the burnout. I didn't realize that, right? Like when that hits, that existential crisis hits, it really makes you question whether this is something for you. And because you really feel like you can't do it. So then you're like, should I keep going? Is this wrong? And in your case, questioning that was correct, right? It led you to something you cared about. For me, it wasn't correct. Like those thoughts of I shouldn't do this wasn't accurate. It was part of the burnout. I definitely did withdraw from a lot of things. Like I didn't go to as many meetings and things like that. And I think what got me out of that was like increasing my support through our advisor, Zach Rosenthal. He's been on this show before, but I talked to him about it, and he just was like super understanding, super caring. Told me that I could kind of, take my own time, or encourage me to do some self-care. He was like, just go to concerts, do things that you enjoy, spend time with friends. And just having that little, wasn't little, that's the support I needed to kind of help me get through and kind of finish out the year, and then kind of cut down on my responsibilities the year after. So it was hard though.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a few things are running through my mind. I mean, when that wind tunnel keeps coming, and then you feel your energy dropping and dropping and dropping, it becomes that much more impossible to even confront the wind tunnel. And so I'm just sort of imagining you like trying to hold on basically to like a cliff, and this wind is trying to push you off of it. Yeah. And then, I mean, getting to that stage of evaluating whether the program is right for you or your job is right for you is horrifying.
Yeah.
Because you put so much into it and had such high hopes, and where do you go from here? And so all of that extra, like, questioning and sort of, like, doomsdaying, I mean, is just an extra burst of wind.
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, clinically with patients who are experiencing burnout, one thing I've seen is a heavy emphasis on perfectionism. And that can come from you or from your boss. Like if your boss is expecting perfection and doesn't have reasonable expectations of, work-life balance or humanness, then that's a setup for strife. But putting those expectations on yourself as well. And I don't know, I guess I've seen this manifest in a couple of ways. One is like trying so hard to be the best that you lose focus on what the value is in doing this work. You may stop liking the learning aspect of it, because learning just becomes this like incredibly stressful thing you have to do in order to stay on top of everybody else. You may lose that community feeling because you're focused on competing instead of collaborating or instead of making friends. And then just trying to live up to an ideal instead of engaging with the work itself is, it takes away the real kind of meaty motivation and replaces it with with an anxiety-driven motivation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the personality trait that tends to, I imagine would be really related to burnout is the perfectionism, especially if, usually high achievers, right? And high achievers in all these different kind of professional settings, and just working with us high standards and not getting that positive feedback from the environment, as you were mentioning, right? Like not having a boss or a raise or something like that saying like good job, then it would feel like being on a hamster wheel of maybe your own high expectations, but really not feeling any reward back, or seeing the futility of like how much you're driving and working. And maybe unfortunately some environments that take advantage of that, right? Like are happy to have really hardworking perfectionist employees, but exploit them, you know?
So I guess one thing I would suggest if you are in that situation is if your inclination is to be incredibly competitive, try the opposite, like try intentionally collaborating with coworkers. I mean, what do you think that is reasonable?
Yeah, the increasing support is huge, right? I mean, you could look at it as a collaboration of increasing support and really setting reasonable expectations for yourself, right? It's hard too. I mean, we're talking about like an individual, approach, but I think there's also a lot to be said for the institutions that people are working for, right? There's just more. There are many institutions that are incentivized to get as much as they can out of the employees, right? Like to, quite frankly, to explore people. And I see that a lot in like the medical field, right? Legal field, like all sorts of healthcare workers, frontline workers, right? Huge now. It's a huge, big problem because these companies or hospitals or firms or whatever are trying to get the most out of their employees. And so they keep increasing demand. And sometimes with a promise of like, oh, if you get to be a partner or get to be an attending or whatever, you'll get released from this. But it's really a grind, and people feel like they are just trying to keep up, like I was saying. And the sad part about it is that that's an institutional problem, right? But then the individual person experiences the burnout, and they feel like they're not good enough. They feel cynical and depersonalized and everything. So it's like this systemic problem that an individual feels, and that can be really hard. That could throw someone into a whole crisis when really it's like they're working for a company or firm that really looks at you as a number, right?
Yeah, I know. I think it's hard. I see like the early 20s. I'm biased because I went through this, but like I see the early 20s as kind of a dangerous developmental stage for this, because young kids are going out into work for the first time and don't understand that there are many different work cultures and environments. And I think it's very easy to feel ashamed, like you just can't keep up or you're not good enough if you feel like a cog in the machine. But actually you could just be in a work environment, like you said, that naturally treats you that way. And so of course you're going to feel that way. And in other work environments, it's completely different. I mean, I love that you were able to go to Zach and he was receptive and genuinely helpful. That can't be said of all bosses.
No, that's very true. And I think I learned, in my early 20s, I learned a very valuable lesson of, if I'm going to be in academia, to look for a mentor that cares about you as a person. It's quite rare. So I'm not saying this is like a solution that everyone has access to. I'm very lucky. But I chose Zach because he was so supportive, and he seemed to care about his students and mentees like his family, and that was more important to me than really anything else. And it's carried me through a lot of really hard times in academia, and so that's the kind of support I need to kind of deal with very high, demanding environments or really competitive environments like Duke or something like that. But everyone needs something different, right? Like some people need more vacation. Some people need the office camaraderie, which I do too. Yeah. That's why having you has been great, right? I mean, stuff like that. I think it's, when we're thinking about tips, like really thinking carefully about what you need as support is like a really big first step.
Yeah.
Especially if you know that this is the job that you care about and want. Just because you feel burnt out in one environment doesn't mean like you can't be a doctor or academic or some other kind of professional or healthcare worker in a different environment, right? It doesn't mean you have to quit the whole field. But knowing what you need to help you deal with the struggles involved in whatever you do.
Yeah. Yeah. I always wonder, especially with like patients who are burning out, if their environment is actually more supportive than they think. Because I think a lot of people are afraid to ask for help, and they're afraid to delegate. They're afraid to take their vacation days. And that is just I mean, and that can be like, even if they're getting good reviews at work, it's just so scary to ask somebody who has power over you for anything to admit weakness. Or I personally don't think it's weakness to just say, no, there are other things I want to do in my life besides work, and I need time for them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that part of that is a little bit of self-awareness, right? And, even if you find yourself burning out, think about the times that you felt the most motivated and efficacious and all the good things that you want at work. Think about why you felt that way. Was it that you had great coworkers? Was it that you had a mentor or supervisor that really believed in you? Was it that you were just doing more self-care? Right? Like, was it a lot of people who tend to burn out also tend to really cut down on the self-care stuff naturally, right? You have a lot of stuff to do, right? You have a lot of work, but reducing sleep, reducing time to relax, reducing time with friends or family, that's all gonna, decrease the amount of support you need. So, just think about that. Think about what you need to feel like I'm supported as like a human being.
Yeah, I also just like to look at life more holistically, because it seems like some people have a problem not putting work as like the number one value. And like, if they're not putting everything into work, then they're wasting time or being lazy. And I think the problem with that is that you can run into what I like to call EFD syndrome, which is every fucking day syndrome. So it's like you wake up, you kind of mindlessly put on your work clothes and you sit at work and you have this realization, I do this every fucking day. Mm-hmm. This is going to drag on into eternity for every fucking day. Mm-hmm. And that is going to happen if you let the other parts of your life atrophy. Because, so I think having vacations to look forward to, for instance, having interesting things that break up your year, new milestones, I don't know, new pursuits, it breathes a little bit of life into that sense of EFD.
Yeah, not only to break up your day, but also to give a little bit more diversity in what you identify with, right? If you're just like, I'm a doctor, I'm a PhD student, that's all I have, then you don't have anything else to balance that out, right? If your work environment is not supportive and it's too much and you're feeling that kind of closing in feeling with burnout, you don't have the personal life or other hobbies or other identities to buffer that. So yeah, that kind of goes with the perfectionism or people who have tunnel vision and delve in. And I'm saying this for myself. Like, I was fully immersed in grad school. It was my entire life. Yeah. And when things didn't go well, when I was just overexhausted with everything, it crumbled who I was, right? So, and I mean, this is also a shout out to a new concept that's talked about more, thankfully, now, which is caregiver burnout. Yeah, that's becoming more of a thing because people are recognizing that all of these parts of burnout can also apply to people who spend a lot of their time or energy caring for someone else. And I mean, being a parent or being a nurse, right, and being a professional caretaker, or caring for, as a lot of people listening, caring for someone with mental health issues. Right? So if this is your total identity and you're putting everything to it and you don't have as much support, like parents in the pandemic, right? No daycare, no parents, no babysitters to help, right? And then they're just kind of overwhelmed with the responsibilities. They're going to feel the same thing, and they're going to feel the same, like, am I good enough? What's wrong with me? Why can't I do this? This feels like I'm going on automatic pilot, so...
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me also, people who are perfectionistic seem to put a lot of emphasis on what other people think of them, and so it can be really difficult to balance your life because caring about what your boss thinks about you might be so preeminent, and it can be really difficult to say, no, actually, I have a valid reason to want to make space for these other areas of my life, like travel or outside learning or something like that, because that is more private, maybe, and individual. And so this feeling of letting down someone, and I think, as a caregiver, there's so much guilt involved in letting down that role for even a second, because what does it mean to want to stop caring for somebody or to choose yourself over caring for somebody who needs you and is vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I guess the best attitude to have is just like, you'll be a better caregiver if you do it.
Yeah, I mean, this actually is the same kind of concepts we were talking about in our last episode in postpartum depression, where I kind of use the same analogy of that, putting on your oxygen mask before putting it on the person you're caring for, your kid or something like that. You are going to just be sapped and drained of your energy and reach a level of burnout where you're not going to be an effective caregiver if you constantly just give up support of yourself, right? So like this is a really situation where self-care is not selfish, right? Really making sure that you have time to sleep, take care of your body, take care of your nutrition, right? Things that support you. And those are the most basic levels, but socialization, seeing people and whatever, your hobbies, the things that you love, right? So that's a little shout out to the caregivers out there who might be experiencing burnout, but it's not like a job, but in that in the sense of we were talking about, like, but burnout is everywhere and it's unfortunately becoming worse. So
okay, so I guess through this conversation, I would say the major tips are: take your vacation days. Try the best you can to give value to the other areas in your life and give yourself permission to boundary them, or rather to set boundaries with work so that you can engage with them. I would say, if there's no culture with your office mates, maybe try to engage with them more. There's actually research showing that acts of kindness can reduce burnout. Which is, I think, goes kind of along with the whole competitive thing. If you're super competitive, you're probably not engaging in those acts of kindness and gratitude towards others, and so that is being depleted as well.
A word about the vacation part. Actually, another therapist was talking to me about this, but when people take a vacation or time off, like medical leave or something when they're burnt out, it's really, really important not just to numb out or continue stressing out or doing something that will further deplete you. It's really important to engage in things that actually support your mental health, right? And be really intentional about it. Yeah. Right? Really spend time with friends, talk to a therapist, do something good for your body, right? So if people just take vacation, end up doing work on a vacation or end up doing something stressful, or even time off, that's just not going to help, right? Yeah. So just really make sure that you're intentionally doing something to care for yourself during that time off. If you go abroad, you could not get a data plan so that you can only use your phone when there's Wi-Fi available. I put your phones down, disconnect to the extent that you can. Obviously, there's some professions where you have to be on call, but I think that's the big problem with today is just, it used to be you left work, and now work is everywhere, even on airplanes. Yeah. And I think the other major tip that I was trying to say is recognize when it's not all your fault, right? It's if you're feeling like I can't do this, like the cynicism, the numbness, the feeling down, we tend to blame ourselves. And we tend to think, we're not good enough. But maybe it's also a balance of both, right? Maybe you're just in an environment that is just giving you so much work and you don't have as much support. And I love what you're saying of actually, seeing if you can get that support, asking people, asking your boss, asking your coworkers, like going to the HR, looking for resources in your job or company or hospital or whatever, and seeing what they have out there to kind of give you what you need. And those conversations could be really hard. I remember talking to Zach about this, and I've heard other people talking to their supervisors. Like, usually it's very emotional, very vulnerable and scary to admit that that's how they're feeling. But, if you're in the right place, you can maybe get a little bit what you need. If the person doesn't respond well, or your job kind of silences it or like puts it down, then that's a sign to take a step back and say, I'm in a work environment that's not supportive of this burnout. So you could kind of take the blame off of you. I would say if you're too scared to talk to your boss immediately, you can also talk to a coworker. I mean, I already knew this about Zach, but like, let's say I didn't know that he was supportive if you're burning out. Like, now I know, that
the boss that we share is very, very receptive. And that makes that conversation, or how you approach the conversation, much different. So, yeah. And so if you are the loved one of someone burning out, I guess I would say try to get them out of the house, disconnected from their phone and doing something fun. I don't know. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, as helping that person increase support, right? So even increasing support in the house of helping them do things that bring their humanity back, right? Going for the walk, or cooking that person dinner, or engaging them in something that, is that self-care activity that helps that person would be great. I also understand that the loved ones of people with burnout, it could be a slog too. It could be really hard, because that person will come back and feel totally down and unmotivated, and it took all their energy to get to work, and when they're home they're drained, so they don't have as much in them to be present for you or the rest of the family or their household chores. So I can understand how hard it would be. Like, it would be kind of like a secondary burnout of like feeling that heaviness. And I hear a lot of loved ones go for just quit your job, just quit it. Like, you're not happy there. And that's not wrong. Like, we all have to evaluate, our professional goals and work environment, whether that really makes sense. I wouldn't jump on let's just quit the job, right? Because that's part of the burnout. The burnout will tell you to quit the job, and you might have such strong urges to withdraw, like I did in my grad school, that I was like, I'm just going to quit.
Yeah.
But take some time and really think out if that's the right decision for you.
Actually, I think the silver lining of your brain telling you just quit is that if you can get to the place where that's an option, then maybe it takes away some of the fear of like doing the intermediary steps. So like, if you feel like you have to hold on to this job no matter what, it can be really hard to tell your boss that you're burning out. But if you are just like, fuck it, like, I can always quit, like, why not just try a couple middle steps first?
That's a good point. If you're not help.
Yeah. Or go down to part-time or something like that.
Yeah. I like that. I like the idea that if you have that flexibility, if you have the option, you could maybe branch out your mind and open your mind to other possibilities, right? Instead of just what the burnout mind is going to tell you is like, I'm in this job, it's misery, I can't do anything about it, or I have to quit and then be lost. Maybe look at the opportunities, really write out the different options. Okay, maybe I could switch to a different department, go part-time, talk to a supervisor, delegate, get some support, whatever. Like, maybe there's more than this that you can do to make this to really tip the scales back to like bringing up the support, bringing down the responsibilities.
Yeah. Okay, so if you are the friend of someone who's burning out, you would say to help them figure out how to seek more support?
Yeah, I mean, our number one tip is validation, right? Like, validating the way they're feeling, and also that this is part of burnout, right? The reduced professional efficacy, for example, is like, okay, yeah, you're feeling like you can't do this job. And not necessarily jumping into whether that's true or not, because maybe some friends want to just reassure, sure, you're great, of course you can do this, right? But that's not really the point. It's like they're so burnt out, that's part of the thoughts that are coming up. So it seems like you're super burnt out. That totally makes sense given all the stuff you have going on with you and how hard it's been. You don't have as much support as you used to have or that you need. Yeah, and maybe even I know that my friends, or like friends and my loved ones, Zach included, were really good at pointing out that the institutional or the work environment pieces that contribute to it. So I have a tendency to like blame myself and be like, I'm not good enough. But then having people just kind of like, but Kibby, you are in this clinic and that clinic and you're doing this kind of job, and like this supervisor wasn't that nice to you. I was like, oh, okay, I'm reacting to something. This is not just me and how good I am, but I'm reacting to like a really tough work environment. So I think that was really helpful when loved ones did that.
Yeah, I think it'd be kind of cool to like remind the burnt out person about their strengths, or even their strengths that are unrelated to work, so that there's some sense of self-efficacy back. I mean, this is kind of stupid, but when I was in Mexico, I went ziplining for the first time and like ziplined into a lagoon, like dropped from a heart. And these are not my strengths, but what I do think my strength is like being bold and adventurous. And so like even just doing something that went along with that kind of made me feel more alive in a period where I feel like I have a terrifying amount of work due in the next 2 months.
Yeah.
And
reminding the person what resources they have inside, right? They probably forgotten, but not just, oh, it'll be fine, don't worry about it, but like, no, Jacqueline, you're very bold. You delve into new things with, a lot of courage, and you could use that to like ask for help, or you could use that to do something new that could feel good or something like that. So reminding that person about their resiliency and strengths,
Yeah.
So another tip for loved ones, one of our really good friends, Dr. Caitlin Fang, did her dissertation she developed an intervention for burnout for biomedical PhD students and tested it out. And it was really awesome. It reduced burnout. It was all delivered by a phone. And it really helped a lot of grad students like feel less burnt out, have less urges to drop out. So, but what she did was she helped the PhD students break down their responsibilities into activities that they are very important, but they've been avoiding. So working on their dissertation or working on something else for their PhD program that are very, very important to their goals, but they were really avoiding because of burnout. So she broke them down into really bite-sized pieces, like really small steps that they felt like were feasible. And then they were able to kind of move ahead and move towards their goals in that kind of like, that kind of gradual way, but with the support of Dr. Fang, who helped them out and kept them accountable and things like that. So I would say that if you're in that boat, if you're feeling a lot of burnout because you have a lot of responsibilities or projects or tasks that are piling up on your to-do list, and you're feeling really overwhelmed by it, a loved one can help you out. A loved one can take those kind of overwhelming responsibilities and break them up into smaller bite-sized pieces. Like, what can you do this week? Even if it's a small step of like opening up a Word document and like writing like 3 sentences, right? Something that's feasible and manageable, and kind of keep that person accountable in a way that's really collaborative. So that's something that a loved one can do. Also, coaches or other kind of accountability buddies can also help out with those kind of things. So I would say that's like a nice empirically supported tip from our really good friend Caitlin Fang.
Okay, well, we have certainly not burned out from talking to you all, and I hope you haven't burned out from talking to us or listening to us. And if you haven't, please go rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. It means so much to us. It really helps our visibility. So we thank you in advance. We will be putting resources for burnout on the website, so you can go check that out. And
also, if you're struggling with trying to figure out if this is the right job for you, if you're burnt out or something, you could listen back to our values episode to really think about what are your values and is this job in line with your values. Mm-hmm. And also our Dear Men episode, as we're talking, like the Dear Men episode that we did, will help give a framework for how to ask for something. Yes. So if you're asking your boss
say no
or
to something,
or just say no for something. Yeah, exactly. So, if you need to say no to like a new, responsibility put on you, project, right, to like reduce that workload, or ask for something to increase the support, refer to our Dear Men episode and get some tips on that.
Beautiful. Well, we will see you all next week. Thanks again for tuning in. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.